Geronimo's Story of His Life, taken down and edited by S. M. Barrett, Superintendent of Education, Lawton, Oklahoma. Digital reprint, elegant ebooks. The book, Geronimo's Story of His Life, authors Geronimo, 1829 to 1909, and S. M. Stephen Melville Barrett, 1865 to unknown. Apparently, nobody knows when this guy died. I tried looking it up. The book was published in 1906. The original book is in the public domain in the United States and in some other countries as well. However, it is unknown when S. M. Barrett died. Depending on the year of his death, the book may still be under copyright in countries that use the life of the author 70 years or more for the duration of copyright. So and so. I'm just going to skip ahead here. Here's a photo. This is Geronimo. And we're going to read about his life today. This book was dictated by Geronimo himself just a few years before he died on a reservation in what was essentially a prisoner of war camp, because he spent his entire life fighting against the Mexican and American governments for the rights of his people. Continuing, Geronimo's Story of His Life, taken down and edited by S. M. Barrett. We read that. New York, Duffield and Company, 1906. Copyright 1905 and 06. Dedicatory. Because he has given me permission to tell my story, because he has read that story and knows I try to speak the truth, because I believe that he is fair-minded and will cause my people to receive justice in the future, and because he is chief of a great people, I dedicate this story of my life to Theodore Roosevelt, President of the United States. Geronimo. Preface. The initial idea of the compilation of this work was to give the reading public an authentic record of the private life of the Apache Indians, and to extend to Geronimo as a prisoner of war the courtesy due to any captive, i.e. the right to state the causes which impelled him in his opposition to our civilization and laws. If the Indians' cause has been properly presented, the captive's defense clearly stated, and the general store of information regarding vanishing types increased, I shall be satisfied. I desire to acknowledge valuable suggestions from Major Charles Taylor, Fort Sill, Oklahoma, Dr. J. M. Greenwood, Kansas City, Missouri, and President David R. Boyd of the University of Oklahoma. I especially desire in this connection to say that without the kindly advice and assistance of President Theodore Roosevelt, this book could not have been written. Excuse me. Respectfully, S. M. Barrett, Lawton, Oklahoma, August 14th, 1906. Let's turn this here. How the book was made. So here's Geronimo dictating his story to S. M. Barrett here, and this is the Apache translator. Here's the contents, parts, 4 parts it looks like. Then there's a bunch of illustrations throughout, which we will see. Introductory. This is S. M. Barrett. I first met Geronimo in the summer of 1904 when I acted for him as interpreter of English into Spanish, and vice versa, in selling a war bonnet. After that, he always had a pleasant word for me when we met, but never entered into a general conversation with me until he learned that I had once been wounded by a Mexican. As soon as he was told of this, he came to see me and expressed freely his opinion of the average Mexican and his aversion to all Mexicans in general. I invited him to visit me again, which he did, and upon his invitation I visited him at his teepee in the Fort Sill Military Reservation. In the summer of 1905, Dr. J. M. Greenwood, superintendent of schools at Kansas City, Missouri, visited me, and I took him to see the chief. Geronimo was quite formal and reserved until Dr. Greenwood said, "I am a friend of General Howard, whom I have heard speak of you." "Come," said Geronimo, and led the way to a shade, had seats brought for us, put on his war bonnet, and served watermelon a l'Apache, cut in big chunks, while he talked freely and cheerfully. When we left, he gave us a pressing invitation to visit him again. In a few days, the old chief came to see me and asked about my father. I said, "You mean the old gentleman from Kansas City? He has returned to his home." "He is your father," said Geronimo. "No," I said, "my father died 25 years ago. Dr. Greenwood is only my friend." After a moment's silence, the old Indian spoke again, this time in a tone of voice intended to carry conviction, or at least to allow no further discussion. "Your natural father is dead. This man has been your friend and adviser from youth. By adoption, he is your father. Tell him he is welcome to come to my home at any time." It was of no use to explain any more, for the old man had determined not to understand my relation to Dr. Greenwood except in accordance with Indian customs, and I let the matter drop. In the latter part of that summer, I asked the old chief to allow me to publish some of the things he had told me, but he objected, saying, however, that if I would pay him, and if the officers in charge did not object, he would tell me the whole story of his life. I immediately called at the Fort Sill, and asked the officer in charge, Lieutenant Purington, for permission to write the life of Geronimo. I was promptly informed that the privilege would not be granted. Lieutenant Purington explained to me the many depredations committed by Geronimo and his warriors, and the enormous cost of subduing the Apaches, adding that the old Apache deserved to be hanged rather than spoiled by so much attention from civilians. A suggestion from me that our government had paid many soldiers and officers to go to Arizona and kill Geronimo and the Apaches, and that they did not seem to know how to do it, did not prove very gratifying to the pride of the regular army officer, and I decided to seek elsewhere for permission. Accordingly, I wrote to President Roosevelt that here was an old Indian who had been held a prisoner of war for 20 years and had never been given a chance to tell his side of the story, and asked that Geronimo be granted permission to tell for publication in his own way the story of his life, and that he be guaranteed that the publication of his story would not affect unfavorably the Apache prisoners of war. By return mail, I received word that the authority had been granted. In a few days, I received word from Fort Sill that the President had ordered the officer in charge to grant permission as requested. An interview was requested that I might receive the instructions of the War Department. When I went to Fort Sill, the officer in command handed me the following brief, which constituted my instructions. Lawton, Oklahoma, August 12, 1905. Geronimo, Apache Chief. S.M. Barrett, Superintendent of Schools. Letter to the President stating that above-mentioned desires to tell his life story that it may be published, and requests permission to tell it in his own way, and also desires assurance that what he has to say will in no way work a hardship for the Apache tribe. First endorsement, War Department, the Military Secretary's Office, Washington, August 25, 1905. Respectfully referred by direction of the Acting Chief of Staff through Headquarters, Department of Texas, to the officer in charge of the Apache prisoners of war at Fort Sill, Oklahoma Territory, for remark and recommendation. Signed, E.F. Ladd, Military Secretary. Second endorsement, headquarters. Okay. Don't need to read all this. And it goes on for a while. There's a lot of this. I recommend you get the book, though, and you can see all these communications that went on. Early in October, I secured the services of an educated Indian, Asa Declugi, son of Woa, chief of the Nedni Apaches, as interpreter, and the work of compiling the book began. Geronimo refused to talk when a stenographer was present, or to wait for corrections or questions when telling the story. Each day he had in mind what he would tell and told it in a very clear, brief manner. He might prefer to talk at his own teepee at Asa Declugi's house, in some mountain dell, or as he rode in a swinging gallop across the prairie. Wherever his fancy led him, there he told whatever he wished to tell, and no more. On the day that he first gave any portion of his autobiography, he would not be questioned about any details, nor would he add another word, but simply said, "Write what I have spoken," and left us to remember and write the story without one bit of assistance. He would agree, however, to come on another day to my study, or any place designated by me, and listen to the reproduction, in Apache, of what had been told, and at such times would answer all questions or add information wherever he could be convinced that it was necessary. He soon became so tired of bookmaking that he would have abandoned the task but for the fact that he had agreed to tell the complete story. When he once gives his word, nothing will turn him from fulfilling his promise. A very striking illustration of this was furnished by him early in January 1906. He had agreed to come to my study on a certain date, but at the appointed hour the interpreter came alone, and said that Geronimo was very sick with cold and fever. He had come to tell me that we must appoint another date, as he feared the old warrior had an attack of pneumonia. It was a cold day, and the interpreter drew a chair up to the grate to warm himself after the exposure of the long ride. Just as he was seating himself, he looked out of the window, then rose quickly, and without speaking pointed to a rapidly moving object coming our way. In a moment I recognized the old chief riding furiously, evidently trying to arrive as soon as the interpreter did, his horse flecked with foam and reeling from exhaustion. Dismounting, he came in and said in a hoarse whisper, "I promised to come. I am here." I explained to him that I had not expected him to come on such a stormy day, and that in his physical condition he must not try to work. He stood for some time, and then without speaking he left the room, remounted his tired pony, and with bowed head faced 10 long miles of cold north wind. He had kept his promise. When he had finished his story, I submitted the manuscript to Major Charles W. Taylor, 18th Cavalry Commandant, Fort Sill, Oklahoma, who gave me some valuable suggestions as to additional related information which I asked Geronimo to give. In most cases, the old chief desired information, but in some instances he refused, stating his reasons for so doing. When the added information had been incorporated, I submitted the manuscript to President Roosevelt, from whose letter I quote, "This is a very interesting volume which you have in manuscript, but I would advise that you disclaim responsibility in all cases where the reputation of an individual is assailed." Sorry. In accordance with that suggestion, I have appended notes throughout the book disclaiming responsibility for adverse criticisms of any persons mentioned by Geronimo. On June 2nd, 1906, I transmitted the complete manuscript to the War Department. The following quotation is from the letter of transmission. In accordance with endorsement number 8 of the brief submitted to me by the commanding officer of Fort Sill, which endorsement constituted the instructions of the department, I submit herewith manuscript of the autobiography of Geronimo. The manuscript has been submitted to the president. At his suggestion, I have disclaimed any responsibility for the criticisms made by Geronimo of individuals mentioned. 6 weeks after the manuscript was forwarded, Thomas C. Barry, Brigadier General, Assistant to the Chief of Staff, sent to the President the following. I'm not going to read all that. The memorandum is published that the objections of the War Department may be made known to the public. The objection is raised to the mention on pages 73 and 74. This is a lot of details we don't really need. It's just describing how he went about getting permission to publish this thing. The fact that Geronimo has told the story in his own way is doubtless the only excuse necessary to offer for the many unconventional features of this work. Okay. And before that, all right. Part 1, The Apaches. The Origin of the Apache Indians, Chapter 1. In the beginning, the world was covered with darkness. There was no sun, no day. The perpetual night had no moon or stars. There were, however, all manner of beasts and birds. Among the beasts were many hideous, nameless monsters, as well as dragons, lions, tigers, wolves, foxes, beavers, rabbits, squirrels, rats, mice, and all manner of creeping things, such as lizards and serpents. Mankind could not prosper under such conditions, for the beasts and the serpents destroyed all human offspring. All creatures had the power of speech and were gifted with reason. There were 2 tribes of creatures, the birds, or the feathered tribe, and the beasts. The former were organized under their chief, the eagle. These tribes often held councils, and the birds wanted light admitted. This the beasts repeatedly refused to do. Finally, the birds made war against the beasts. The beasts were armed with clubs, but the eagle had taught his tribe to use bows and arrows. The serpents were so wise that they could not all be killed. One took refuge in a perpendicular cliff of a mountain in Arizona, and his eye, changed into a brilliant stone, may be seen in that rock to this day. The bears, when killed, would each be changed into several other bears, so that the more bears the feathered tribe killed, the more there were. The dragon could not be killed either, for he was covered with 4 coats of horny scales, and the arrows would not penetrate these. One of the most hideous, vile monsters was proof against arrows, so the eagle flew up high in the air with a round, white stone, and let it fall on the monster's head, killing him instantly. This was such a good service that the stone was called sacred. A symbol of this stone is used in the tribal game of Ka. They fought for many days, but at last the birds won the victory. After this war was over, although some evil beasts remained, the birds were able to control the councils, and light was admitted. Then mankind could live and prosper. The eagle was chief in this good fight. Therefore his feathers were borne by man as emblems of wisdom, justice, and power. Among the few human beings that were yet alive was a woman who had been blessed with many children, but these had always been destroyed by the beasts. If by any means she succeeded in eluding the others, the dragon, who was very wise and very evil, would come himself and eat her babes. After many years, a son of the rainstorm was born to her, and she dug for him a deep cave. The entrance to this cave she closed, and over the spot built a campfire. This concealed the babe's hiding place and kept him warm. Every day she would remove the fire and descend into the cave where the child's bed was to nurse him. Then she would return and rebuild the campfire. Frequently, the dragon would come and question her, but she would say, "I have no more children. You have eaten all of them." When the child was larger, he would not always stay in the cave, for he sometimes wanted to run and play. Once the dragon saw his tracks. Now this perplexed and enraged old dragon, for he could not find the hiding place of the boy. But he said that he would destroy the mother if she did not reveal the child's hiding place. The poor mother was very much troubled. She could not give up her child, but she knew the power and cunning of the dragon. Therefore she lived in constant fear. Soon after this, the boy said that he wished to go hunting. The mother would not give her consent. She told him of the dragon, the wolves, and the serpents, but he said, "Tomorrow I go." At the boy's request, his uncle, who was the only man then living, made a little bow and some arrows for him, and the two went hunting the next day. They trailed the deer far up the mountain, and finally the boy killed a buck. His uncle showed him how to dress the deer and broil the meat. They broiled 2 hindquarters, one for the child and one for his uncle. When the meat was done, they placed it on some bushes to cool. Just then the huge form of the dragon appeared. The child was not afraid, but his uncle was so dumb with fright that he did not speak or move. Then the dragon took the boy's parcel of meat and went aside with it. He placed the meat on another bush and seated himself beside it. Then he said, "This is the child I have been seeking. Boy, you are nice and fat, so when I have eaten this venison, I shall eat you." The boy said, "No, you shall not eat me, and you shall not eat that meat." So he walked over to where the dragon sat and took the meat back to his own seat. The dragon said, "I like your courage, but you are foolish, and what do you think you could do?" "Well," said the boy, "I can do enough to protect myself, as you may find out." Then the dragon took the meat again, and then the boy retook it. 4 times in all the dragon took the meat, and after the 4th time the boy replaced the meat. He said, "Dragon, will you fight me?" The dragon said, "Yes, in whatever way you like." The boy said, "I will stand 100 paces distant from you, and you may have 4 shots at me with your bow and arrows, provided that you will then exchange places with me and give me 4 shots." "Good," said the dragon. "Stand up." We interrupt with a photo of Geronimo dressed as in days of old. Then the dragon took his bow, which was made of a large pine tree. He took 4 arrows from his quiver. They were made of young pine tree saplings, and each arrow was 20 feet in length. He took deliberate aim. Just as the arrow left the bow, the boy made a peculiar sound and leaped into the air. Immediately, the arrow was shivered into 1,000 splinters, and the boy was seen standing on top of a bright rainbow over the spot where the dragon's aim had been directed. Soon the rainbow was gone, and the boy was standing on the ground again. 4 times this was repeated. Then the boy said, "Dragon, stand here. It is my time to shoot." And the dragon said, "All right. Your little arrows cannot pierce my first coat of horn, and I have 3 other coats. Shoot away." The boy shot an arrow, striking the dragon just over the heart, and 1 coat of the great horny scales fell to the ground. The next shot another coat, and then another, and then the dragon's heart was exposed. Then the dragon trembled, but could not move. Before the fourth arrow was shot by the boy, said, "Uncle, you are dumb with fear. You have not moved. Come here, or the dragon will fall on you." His uncle ran toward him. Then he sped the fourth arrow with true aim, and it pierced the dragon's heart. With a tremendous roar, the dragon rolled down the mountainside, down 4 precipices into a canyon below. Immediately, storm clouds swept the mountains, lightning flashed, thunder rolled, and the rain poured. When the rainstorm had passed, far down in the canyon below, they could see fragments of the huge body of the dragon lying among the rocks, and the bones of this dragon may still be found there. This boy's name was Apache. Usen taught them how to prepare herbs for medicine. Usen is the Apache word for God. It is used here because it implies the attributes of deity that are held in their primitive religion. Apache means enemy. Usen taught him how to prepare herbs for medicine, how to hunt, and how to fight. He was the first chief of the Indians and wore the eagle's feathers as the sign of justice, wisdom, and power. To him and to his people, as they were created, Usen gave homes in the land of the West. Chapter 2. Subdivisions of the Apache tribe. The Apache Indians are divided into 6 sub-tribes. To one of these, the Bedonkohe, I belong. Our tribe inhabited that region of mountainous country which lies west from the east line of Arizona and south from the headwaters of the Gila River. East of us lived the Chihenne, Ojo Caliente, Hot Springs Apaches. Our tribe never had any difficulty with them. Victoria, their chief, was always a friend to me. He always helped our tribe when we asked him for help. He lost his life in the defense of the rights of his people. He was a good man and a brave warrior. His son, Charlie, now lives here in this reservation with us. North of us lived the White Mountain Apaches. They were not always on the best of terms with our tribe, yet we seldom had any war with them. I know their chief, Hashka-Ila, personally, and I considered him a good warrior. Their range was next to that of the Navajo Indians, who were not of the same blood as the Apaches. We held councils with all the Apache tribes, but never with the Navajo Indians. However, we traded with them and sometimes visited them. To the west of our country ranged the Chiahen Apaches. They had 2 chiefs within my time, Cosito and Kodahuya. They were friendly, but not intimate with our tribe. South of us lived the Chokanen, Chiricahua Apaches. Those chief in the old days was Cochise, and later his son Naiche. This tribe was always on the most friendly terms with us. We were often in camp and on the trail together. Naiche, who was my companion in arms, is now my companion in bondage. To the south and west of us lived the Nedni Apaches. Their chief was Woa, called by the Mexicans Captain Woa. They were our firm friends. The land of this tribe lies partly in Old Mexico and partly in Arizona. Woa and I often camped and fought side by side as brothers. My enemies were his enemies, my friends his friends. He is dead now, but his son Asa is interpreting this story for me. Still, the 4 tribes, Bedonkohe, Badonkohe, Chokonen, Chihene, and Nedni, who were fast friends in the days of freedom, cling together as they decrease in number. Only the destruction of all our people would dissolve our bonds of friendship. Excuse me. This is Naiche, or Naches, son of Kohise, hereditary chief of the Chiricahua Apaches. Naiche was Geronimo's lieutenant during the protracted wars in Arizona. We are vanishing from the earth, yet I cannot think we are useless, or Usen would not have created us. He created all tribes of men and certainly had a righteous purpose in creating each. For each tribe of men Usen created, he also made a home. In the land created for any particular tribe, he placed whatever would be best for the welfare of that tribe. When Usen created the Apaches, he also created their homes in the west. He gave to them such grain, fruits, and game as they needed to eat. To restore their health when disease attacked them, he made many different herbs to grow. He taught them where to find these herbs and how to prepare them for medicine. He gave them a pleasant climate, and all they needed for clothing and shelter was at hand. Thus it was in the beginning, the Apaches and their homes, each created for the other by Usen himself. When they are taken from these homes, they sicken and die. How long will it be until it is said there are no Apaches? The Apache Indians held prisoners of war are greatly decreasing in numbers. There seems to be no particular cause, but nevertheless their numbers grow smaller. Chapter 3, Early Life. I was born in Nodoyon Canyon, Arizona, June 1829. In that country which lies around the headwaters of the Gila River, I was reared. This range was our fatherland. Among these mountains, our wigwams were hidden. The scattered valleys contained our fields. The boundless prairies stretching away on every side were our pastures. The rocky caverns were our burying places. I was fourth in a family of 8 children, 4 boys and 4 girls. 4 is a magic number with the Bedonkohe Apaches. The dragon had 4 coats of scales. He took little Apache's meat 4 times. They, the dragon and the Apache, exchanged 4 shots. The dragon rolled down 4 precipices. There are 4 moccasins used in the tribal game of Ka, and only 4 plays that can be made. A boy must accompany the warriors 4 times on the warpath before he can be admitted to the council. Geronimo is the 4th of a family of 4 boys and 4 girls. He has had 4 wives that were full-blood Bedonkohe Apaches and 4 that were part Bedonkohe Apache and other Apache blood. 4 of his children have been killed by Mexicans, and 4 have been held in bondage by the U.S. government. He firmly believes in destiny and in the magic of the number 4. Besides Geronimo, only 4 full-blood Bedonkohe Apaches are now living. They are Porrico, Whitehorse, Nadaste, Motaniel, and Toclonen. Here's an image of those last 4 Apaches before we go back up to continue. The last of the Bedonkohe Apache tribe, besides Geronimo. Continuing, of that family, only myself, my brother, Porrico, the White Horse, and my sister, Nadaste, are yet alive. We are held as prisoners of war in this military reservation, Fort Sill. As a babe, I rolled on the dirt floor of my father's teepee, hung in my stoke, Apache name for cradle, at my mother's back, or suspended from the bough of a tree. I was warmed by the sun, rocked by the winds, and sheltered by the trees as other Indian babes. When a child, my mother taught me the legends of our people, taught me of the sun and sky, the moon and stars, the clouds and storms. She also taught me to kneel and pray to Usen for strength, health, wisdom, and protection. We never prayed against any person, but if we had aught against any individual, we ourselves took vengeance. We were taught that Usen does not care for the petty quarrels of men. My father had often told me of the brave deeds of our warriors, of the pleasures of the chase, and the glories of the warpath. With my brothers and sisters, I played about my father's home. Sometimes we played at hide-and-seek among the rocks and pines. Sometimes we loitered in the shade of the cottonwood trees or sought the shuddock, a kind of wild cherry, while our parents worked in the field. Sometimes we played that we were warriors. We would practice stealing upon some object that represented an enemy, and in our childish imitation often performed the feats of war. Sometimes we would hide away from our mother to see if she could find us, and often thus concealed go to sleep and perhaps remain hidden for many hours. When we were old enough to be of real service, we went to the field with our parents, not to play, but to toil. When the crops were to be planted, we broke the ground with wooden hoes. We planted the corn in straight rows, the beans among the corn, and the melons and pumpkins in irregular order, irregular order over the field. We cultivated these crops as there was need. Our field usually contained about 2 acres of ground. The fields were never fenced. It was common for many families to cultivate land in the same valley and share the burden of protecting the growing crops from destruction by the ponies of the tribe or by deer and other wild animals. Melons were gathered as they were consumed. In the autumn, pumpkins and beans were gathered and placed in bags or baskets. Ears of corn were tied together by the husks, and then the harvest was carried on the backs of ponies up to our homes. Here the corn was shelled and all the harvest stored away in caves or other secluded places to be used in winter. We never fed corn to our ponies, but if we kept them up in the winter time, we gave them fodder to eat. We had no cattle or other domestic animals except our dogs and ponies. We did not cultivate tobacco, but found it growing wild. This we cut and cured in autumn, but if the supply ran out, the leaves from the stalks left standing served our purpose. All Indians smoked, men and women. No boy was allowed to smoke until he had hunted alone and killed large game, wolves and bears. Unmarried women were not prohibited from smoking, but were considered immodest if they did so. Nearly all matrons smoked. The Apaches did not smoke the peace pipe unless it was proposed by some other Indians. They had no large pipes, in fact. They usually smoked cigarettes made by rolling the tobacco in wrappers of oak leaves. Wow. Besides grinding corn by hand with stone mortars and pestles for bread, we sometimes crushed it and soaked it, and after it had fermented, made from this juice a tiswin, which had the power of intoxication and was very highly prized by the Indians. This work was done by the squaws and children. When the berries or nuts were to be gathered, the small children and the squaws would go in parties to hunt them, and sometimes stay all day. When they went any great distance from camp, they took ponies to carry the baskets. I frequently went with these parties, and upon one of these excursions, a woman named Chokole got lost from the party and was riding her pony through a thicket in search of her friends. Her little dog was following as she slowly made her way through the thick underbrush and pine trees. All at once, a grizzly bear rose in her path and attacked the pony. She jumped off and her pony escaped. But the bear attacked her, so she fought him the best she could with her knife. The little dog, by snapping at the bear's heels and distracting his attention from the woman, enabled her for some time to keep pretty well out of his reach. Finally, the grizzly struck her over the head, tearing off almost her whole scalp. She fell, but did not lose consciousness, and while prostrate struck him 4 good licks with her knife, and he retreated. After he had gone, she replaced her torn scalp and bound it up as best she could. Then she turned deathly sick and had to lie down. That night her pony came into camp with his load of nuts and berries, but no rider. The Indians hunted for her, but did not find her until the second day. They carried her home, and under the treatment of their medicine men, all her wounds were healed. Well, let's go back to the picture we had here. Oh, sorry. That's the some horses in an Apache corral. Good moment for that. Oh, I lost my place. Okay. The Indians knew what herbs to use for medicine, how to prepare them, and how to give the medicine. This they had been taught by Usen in the beginning. And each succeeding generation had men who were skilled in the art of healing. In gathering the herbs, in preparing them, and in administering the medicine, as much faith was held in prayer as in the actual effect of the medicine. Usually about 8 persons worked together in making medicine, and there were forms of prayer and incantations to attend each stage of the process. 4 attended to the incantations and 4 to the preparation of the herbs. Some of the Indians were skilled in cutting out bullets, arrowheads, and other missiles with which warriors were wounded. I myself have done much of this, using a common dirk or butcher knife. The only foundation for the statement frequently made that Geronimo was a medicine man. Okay. Small children wore very little clothing in winter and none in the summer. Women usually wore a primitive skirt, which consisted of a piece of cotton cloth fastened about the waist and extending to the knees. Men wore breech cloths and moccasins. In winter they had shirts and leggings in addition. Frequently, when the tribe was in camp and a number of boys and girls, by agreement, would steal away and meet at a place several miles distant, where they could play all day free from tasks. They were never punished for these frolics, but if their hiding places were discovered, they were ridiculed. That's fun. We'll continue with Chapter 4 in Part 2 of this series, the next video. That is Tribal Amusements, Manners, and Customs. Sounds fun. Thanks for watching this, and I'll see you in the next one.